Odoo software. It's another product that you may or may not have heard of, and it used to be called OpenERP. It's one of the leading, if not the leading, open source ERP systems, and in fact the only open source ERP system to make our top 10 list. And it's highly adopted by small and mid-market companies across the world. Very easy to use, very straightforward system, has very straightforward pricing, which a lot of small and mid-market companies appreciate. It also allows you to do a lot with it. There's a lot of flexibility in Odoo in terms of integration and adding applications and working your way and growing your way into the full capabilities of the software. A lot of the other systems in our top 10 list require you to implement a broad cross-section of functionality in order for the whole thing to work, whereas Odoo is built more modular to where you can implement module by module as your company grows and expands. Now, the downside of Odoo is that it requires a certain amount of focus and attention. It's an open source system, which is good news, that provides a lot of flexibility, but it requires very much of a hands-on implementation approach to figuring out how you want this all to work for your organization. There's a little bit more legwork from the, call it the end user perspective or the functional implementation perspective. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're an organization that's growing very quickly and you don't have a lot of IT staff and you don't have a lot of bandwidth to be messing around with software, trying to figure out how to implement it and manage it day to day, that can be a little bit much for some organizations. And the other part of it is that it doesn't have as much predefined business processes and workflows as you might find with some of the other vendors in the top 10 list. So those are some things to think about or some trade-offs that come along with it. But given the fact that so many organizations use it and it is flexible, easy to use, focused on the small to mid-market, that's enough to land Odoo at number 3 on our list. Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Now, Microsoft D365 has two versions, or two primary versions of the product. One is called F&O, or Finance and Operations, which is for larger organizations, and then you have Business Central, which is more for small and mid-market companies. Business Central is a little bit more focused, a little bit more simple, a little bit more vanilla, and it can be more suitable for an organization that isn't overly complex. Now, one of the benefits of Microsoft Dynamics is that the product itself is fairly flexible when compared to some of the other larger vendors in our top 10. It's easy to integrate, relatively speaking, and it's also something that is used by a lot of organizations, and it's commonly compared to other shortlist options for small and mid-market companies. Now, the downside of Business Central is its flexibility can sometimes be a liability. Just because you can change the software more easily doesn't mean you should, and that's one of the challenges that a lot of small and mid-market companies have with implementing a product like Microsoft D365. The other downside, and probably the biggest downside risk of implementing Microsoft D365, is that the value-added reseller ecosystem of partners that can help implement the product is very much fragmented, very inconsistent. There's not much control over it. So you really have to vet those partners very carefully because there's a lot of poor quality implementers out there. There's some good ones, but you have to wade through a lot of the poor ones to get there. So all those pros and cons being considered is enough to land Microsoft D365 Business Central at number 2 on our list.